chapter of 2 Kings, chapter 16, verses 1 to 20, covers the spiritual and political environment, as well as the death of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah. Now, Ahaz ascended to the throne at age 20, and he reigned for 16 years. He didn't do what was right in the sight of the Lord. Hi, I'm Ken Godevinus, and this is Digging for Scriptural Gems once again. Thanks for joining us. Verse 3 says that he was following the ways of the evil kings of Israel in the north. And as an example, the author says Ahaz even made his own son walk or pass, quote, through the fire according to the sinful practices of the nations God had driven out from Israel in the past. Some editors think this may refer to child sacrifice, while others think it is a less drastic cultic practice. He also sacrificed and burned incense in the high places on the hills and under every green tree, according to our text. Verse 5 tells us he was able to fight off both the king of Aram and the king of Israel from the north, which had attacked him and his country or kingdom of Judah. But Rezin, the king of Aram, managed to take over Elath at that time and had the Judeans cast out, replacing them with Arameans who lived there at least until the time of writing 2 Kings. We note that some think this Aram may have been the king of Edom, as the names Edom and Aram are easily confused in the Hebrew consonantal script. Meanwhile, Ahaz writes to the king of Assyria and asks for help to deliver him from Rezin of Aram and Pekah, P-E-K-A-H, the king of Israel in the north. Ahaz sent the king of Assyria silver and gold from the house of the Lord and the treasures in the king's house. He sent them those as presents. It is interesting to note that he wrote, quote, he wrote to the king, "I am your servant and your dependent." By doing this, Ahaz essentially made Judah a subject kingdom to Assyria. The king of Assyria then goes and takes Damascus, carries the people away into exile to Kir, and puts Rezin to death. So the gifts paid off. Ahaz then goes to Damascus to meet this king, again, Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria. This was much more than a visit. This was an official act of submission. He sees the altar that was there and sends the pattern of it to Uriah the priest back south. And Uriah builds one like it, and Ahaz, on his return from Damascus, visits it and uses it for his burnt and meal offerings. He poured libations on it, as well as the blood of his peace offerings. Ahaz acts or served as a priest at the altar of his own design. Since he created his own place of worship, it also made sense that he would disregard God's command that a king must not serve as a priest. And if you can't remember that command, look back to Numbers chapter 18, verse 7. You'll see the instruction there. Now, verse 14 here tells us he moved the bronze altar from the front of the house and put it on the north side of his altar. And he commanded Uriah to burn all the offerings on this new great altar. And Uriah followed orders. To further please the king of Assyria, Ahaz made several other alterations, as noted in verses 17 and 18. And we must note that to accommodate many of the pagan items and to please the pagan king, Ahaz had to make major alterations to the holy items. This was a major undertaking that is well worth further study on your own. And then we get once more to the fact that Ahaz also dies, gets buried with his fathers in the city of David, and we're told that his son Hezekiah, you've heard of him before, reigned in his place. Now let's stop there and dig just a little deeper into this passage. Passing through the fire David Guzik says, is also related to the worship of Molech, the pagan god, or demon more accurately. Molech was worshipped by heating a metal statue representing the god until it was red hot, then placing a living infant on the outstretched hands of the statue while beating drums drowned out the screams of the child until it burned to death. Sadly, even a man as great as Solomon at least sanctioned the worship of Molech and built a temple to this idol. For different reasons, of course, he did that. Check it out, 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 7. Now, one of the great crimes of the northern tribes of Israel was that their worship of Moloch led to the Assyrian captivity in 2 Kings 17:17. We're coming to that, which we will study next time. And King Manasseh of Judah gave his son to Molech, 2 Kings 21:6. Robert Jameson sees it this way. The hands of the idol Molech being red hot, the children were passed through between them, which was considered a form of purification. There's reason to believe that in certain circumstances the children were burnt to death. Psalm 106, verse 37. This was strongly prohibited in the law. You can check that out, Leviticus 18:21, chapter 20, verses 2 to 5, Deuteronomy 18, verse 10. Although there's no evidence that it was practiced in Israel until the time of Ahaz, which we're studying right now. We also note that when a nation writes to another ungodly nation saying, I am your servant and your dependent, rather than depend on God, you can almost be 100% sure things will not go well for them in the end. Before Ahaz asked for help, Isaiah had offered him a sign for assurance of God's help in the struggle against the combined armies of Israel and Syria. We read that in Isaiah chapter 7, or we read it rather in Isaiah chapter 7, verses 1 to 12. So this was a fair offer to a foul sinner, commentator Trapp says. But Ahaz refused under the excuse of not wanting to test God, when instead he really wanted to trust in the king of Assyria. It's also a bad move for a godly nation to fashion their altars on the style of the altars used by pagan nations. But the king of Judah did just that. Friends, we cannot expect God to bless us when we copy in our actions what the ungodly do. Weisman says, this is the first instance where Judah imitates Israel's apostasy. The question arises as to why Ahaz was attracted to the worship he saw in Damascus. 2 Chronicles 28, verse 23 explains it this way. For he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus, which had defeated him, saying, because the gods of the kings of Syria helped them, I will sacrifice to them that they may help me. But they were the ruin of him and of all Israel. This explains why many churches today put their trust in the tools, the techniques, and principles of worldly success. They think the gods or the methods or the techniques of Damascus will give them a victory. Mayer says, quote, this introduction of the altar of a heathen shrine into the holy temple of Jerusalem reminds us of the many rites in modern religious observances which have been borrowed from paganism and warns us that the church has no right to go to the world for its methods and principles, end of quote. And what about Uriah? Now, this Uriah is likely the same one as the Uriah in Isaiah chapter 8. Curiously, Isaiah chapter 8, verses 1 to 2 say, he was a faithful witness. Apparently, he was a good and faithful man who later compromised. Uriah not only allowed Ahaz to do these things, he participated in his evil and idolatrous plans. The corruption of King Ahaz spread to other leaders in Judah. The king was that Ahaz had no real relationship with God. And had he had one, and had he trusted God through the signs that he would have been able to withstand its enemies that the prophet had given him, Judah may not have fallen. I want to end with a nice wrap-up statement from Matthew Henry on Ahaz. He writes, quote, Ahaz, resigning his life in the midst of his days at 36 years of age, verse 19, and leaving his kingdom to a better man, Hezekiah his son, verse 20, who proved as much a friend to the temple as he, Ahaz, had been an enemy to it. Perhaps this very son was one he had made to pass through the fire and thereby dedicated him to Moloch. But God, by his grace, snatched him as a brand out of the burning. May God continue to snatch many in the same way, especially those who had or have ungodly fathers. Next time, before we get to Hezekiah, we'll look at Hosea's reign in Israel in the north, as well as the captivity of Samaria. In the meantime, if you like what you're studying with us and the way we're doing it, if you like what you're reading, what you're seeing, please indicate that on the video you're watching. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Digging for Scriptural Gems. Till next time, keep on studying the Word of God.